Welcome to the Causes or Cures podcast, your gateway to understanding health and groundbreaking medical research in a fun and easy to understand way. With Dr. Eeks as your host, join us as we sit down with the world's leading doctors and scientists to unravel the mysteries of health. From practical tips on well-being to the latest breakthroughs in medical research, we cover it all. Don't forget to subscribe. Now, let's ignite our curiosity and together dive into today's episode.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Causes or Cures. I'm Dr. Eeks, your host, and thanks for joining in. This is a fascinating and fun episode. I think you're going to love it. Today, we are talking about animals practicing medicine. Yes, real animals in the wild, treating infections, parasites, sick tummies without a license, without a CVS, without a copay in sight. And what you'll learn today is that not only do they practice medicine, but they do it well. My guest is Dr. Jaap de Roode, a biologist who studies how animals heal themselves and the author of a mind-bending new book on animal medicine, which I will link to in the show notes and hope you all read, especially if you have a curious mind. Monarch butterflies, orangutans, bears, birds, they're all out there doing their own version of pharmacology and medicine. And honestly, some of them might be doing it better than we are. Not only that, but you'll hear about how modern day conventional human medicine took some ideas from observing how animals did it. And I say took because I don't think the animals got any money for it, or treats or land or peace. Things they probably value more than money. Anyhow, if you've ever wondered if our species is truly special or just full of ourselves, or whether your dog knows something you don't, or why monarch butterflies choose toxic plants on purpose, this episode is for you. Give me a few seconds and we will connect to Dr. de Roode. All right, everybody, we are connecting with Dr. Jaap de Roode, and hopefully I said that okay.
Very good.
It's pretty good. Okay. I'll practice a few more times. And I just finished listening to his book, Doctors by Nature, How Ants, Apes, and Other Animals Heal Themselves. And I was naturally interested in this topic. And also my dad's a veterinarian. So I've grown up with animals my whole life and all different kinds. But anyways, can you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and how you got interested in this topic of animals and medicine?
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks so much for having me. Great pleasure to be here. And I always love to talk about the book because it's a topic that's so interesting, how animals use medicine and what we can learn from them. So how I got into it is actually kind of accidental because I was studying biology in the Netherlands. That's where I grew up. And then I was not at all interested in parasites and things until there was a one-day symposium that my professor at the time had organized. And that's where I met the professor that would become my PhD advisor, who was studying malaria parasites. And it was really the first time I heard about parasites. And I was so interested, intrigued by it. So I ended up working with him. That was at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland, and really became interested in parasites. But then a lot of our work really focused on a lab system where we studied mice and mosquitoes in the lab. And I really wanted to move to a model organism, a system that I could study both in the lab and in the field. And I discovered that monarch butterflies have parasites that are actually quite similar to malaria parasites. Until then, I just knew from their spectacular migration. Monarchs migrate from North America to Mexico every year. I didn't realize that they become sick, like you and me and our pets. And so, then I moved to the monarch butterflies. And when I did that, that's when I started realizing that a lot of animals can use medicine.
Now, how did you get to Emory?
So as I was studying at the University of Edinburgh, I was about to finish my PhD and I'm looking for the next opportunities. And I found out about a lab at Emory University that was run by Dr. Sonja Altizer. And she was the one who studied these parasites in monarch butterflies. So I wrote fellowships to come here and do the work with her. Then she actually moved to University of Georgia and I moved with her. Then a job became available at Emory. So then I moved back to Emory and that was in 2008. And I've been there ever since working on these butterflies and studying how to use medicine.
Monarch butterflies using medicine. That's what yeah. And that's a fascinating sentence that I never actually thought I would say.
Yeah.
But
Same here.
yeah, and in your book you talk a lot about parasites and pathogens and kind of like how animals medicate themselves. And I mean, you go from butterflies and ants and apes and chimpanzees and even bears. And so, but you also talk a lot about like, what are the qualifying factors? Like, how do you distinguish that an animal's just not doing this? It's actually medicine. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. And maybe I can illustrate that using the monarch butterflies, which is, of course, the system that I studied and got into this topic. And like I said, I came to the US to study the parasites of monarch butterflies. And what is very clear about monarch butterflies is that as caterpillars, they can only eat milkweeds. And so, when monarchs lay their eggs on, say, lettuce or an oak tree, their caterpillars cannot survive. They can only eat milkweed. So the females lay eggs on milkweed. That's what the caterpillars can eat. But there's a lot of different species of milkweed, and some of them are very toxic and some of them are less toxic. And they're toxic because they have a toxic chemical called cardenolides. And originally, people always thought that these chemicals, and actually monarchs are resistant to them, and they actually take the chemicals, put them in their own tissues, and that makes them toxic to predators such as birds. But with my background in parasitism and things that make us sick, I was wondering if these same chemicals can also work against the parasite. So then I did experiments where I had monarchs on different species of milkweed and then had the parasites looked at what they did. And I found that the caterpillars, when they were reared on more medicinal milkweed, more toxic milkweed, they became infected less, they became sick a lot less. And so that was really a demonstration that these chemicals can work as a medicine. From there, the question was, can monarchs take advantage of this? And so we speculated that maybe the caterpillars, when they're sick, they can choose the more medicinal milkweed. And it turned out they couldn't. But then we thought that kind of makes sense because caterpillars in the wild are not the ones making the choices between the different milkweeds. It's really their mothers. So then we did experiments where we looked at mothers that were infected or not with the parasite and gave them choices between medicinal, non-medicinal milkweed and found that when they are infected, they lay a lot more of their eggs on that medicinal milkweed, which is kind of this way that they keep their future offspring healthy. So it reduces their infection. It also reduces, if they do become infected, it reduces how sick they become. So a great example of mommy knows best. And so to get back to your question of, how do you determine that what you see is an animal using medicine? That can be quite tricky. And this is where, I have been very lucky that I can do experiments in the lab. So I can use a wild system with the actual butterfly and the actual parasites they would get in the wild, but we can rear them in captivity. We can, control whether they are sick or not. We can give them choices between plants that make them more or less sick. And then we can see what they choose. And then we can measure how sick they become. And then you can really see that, when they're sick, these mothers prefer to lay their eggs on medicinal milkweed, and that helps their offspring. Because there's a lot of cases where a different behavior is not actually beneficial for the host, for the animal, but for the parasite, because the parasites are really good at controlling the animals for things that are good for the parasites, not for the host.
Yes. And when I read in your book about the moths that drown themselves because the parasites, I guess, get them to do that.
Yeah, so those are crickets. I think
crickets. Sorry, crickets.
Some other species as well. But yeah, so those are really fascinating worms that infect these crickets. And these worms, to have sex with other worms, they can only do that in the water. And so when they infect these crickets, they make these crickets jump in the water and essentially drown themselves because these crickets don't normally go in the water. And then the worm wriggles out and they find another worm and mate. It's really gruesome. If you love parasites like me, it's just utterly amazing. But if you don't find parasites that enticing, it's pretty gruesome and pretty gross.
You love parasites. That's a great sentence.
Well, yeah, I love them as a biologist. I don't love them in or on my own body. I will
Yeah.
be honest about that. But, when you take a step back and you just think about, parasites and pathogens, so organisms that make other animals or other hosts, whether it's plants or animals, fungi, that make them sick, they have a bad rap, right? I mean, we don't like them. But when you look at life from their perspective, they're just in the same business as us. They're trying to survive, they're trying to reproduce, they're trying to make it. And it's really tough for them because everyone is against them. And so they have to fight all these defenses that all these hosts throw at them. So yeah, it's interesting putting yourself in the shoes of a parasite kind of gives you a lot of sympathy for them as well.
I appreciate that. I actually, when I had a cockroach invasion really bad during the pandemic in our apartment building, I don't know, it was like all the cockroaches, their whole world changed. Ours did too. Yeah. And I was like, oh my goodness, this is getting out of control. But then I was like, okay, if you stare at a cockroach for a long enough time, you kind of develop this sort of like empathy for it. Like he's just trying to be a cockroach, which probably sounds crazy to some people. I'm aware of that, but that's kind of how I felt,
It's true, actually, because these cockroaches, we view them as pests. And of course, they were here first. But also, when you try to understand them, they actually have a pretty interesting social life. So they live in these societies. So, they have little baby cockroaches that they look after and stuff. So I think it's with everything. Once you understand things better, you become more understanding and have more sympathy, Whether you want to propagate them in your house, that's a different question. But at least it makes you look at them in a different light when you understand them better.
I did think about, starting an Olympics for them or something, because it was during the pandemic, but nah. But it all kind of died down after COVID. I don't know if it's like when the restaurants reopened. I don't know. It was just weird. It was just
interesting.
It is interesting. It's something I noticed. So the monarch butterflies who lay the eggs on the medicinal plants, do they pass this knowledge on? Like, how do they know? Like, okay, this is what we should do to reduce the spread of this infection?
So I think they do through their genes. And so not through any learning or teaching behavior. It's actually quite interesting because the specific case of monarch butterflies, when they have these parasites, they form spores on the abdomen of the butterfly and they form thousands or millions of them. And those spores are sitting there. So when the female lays an egg, those spores end up on the egg and on the milkweed on which the egg is laid. And so she cannot really avoid that. But what she can do is then lay those eggs on plants that provide medicine at the same time that she's passing on these parasites. But it's interesting because she doesn't directly benefit from it. So she doesn't have any relief of symptoms. All the benefits are in her offspring. So she cannot learn from what she did, whether that's successful or anything. So she wouldn't be able to pass on that knowledge. But also because this is a case where the individual doesn't learn from the behavior, it is the kind of medication behavior that's really in the genes. And so the way I think about it is that when they're sick, it changes their physiology, it changes how they feel, and therefore they respond differently to plants. And I think that's what's going on. When they don't feel good, they go for more toxic plants that taste more bitter because they actually taste the plants with their feet, which is super fun. Butterflies have taste receptors in their feet, so they taste with their feet. And I think they probably respond to these more strongly bitter tastes and therefore lay more eggs. So I think it's a really innate response that's not involving any learning. A lot of other animals do learn either on their own or from each other.
Okay. Yeah, I'm going to ask you about some of those other examples in the book with bears and chimpanzees. But let's talk about the toxicity in the plants. And because, when you read your book and you make the point, like, the toxic stuff is kind of like the medicinal stuff too.
Yeah.
And it seems a little counterintuitive. So what is your explanation of that?
Yeah. Well, I think it's actually a similarity between the medicines that animals use and that humans use.
Yeah.
I know that at this moment, it's still allowed to have these advertisements for drugs and medicines on TV, right? And it's always interesting that the final part of that is like all the bad things about all the side effects that you get. And it's the same when you look in the little leaflet that comes in the box of your medication. There's all these side effects. And we see that in animals too. So at the end of the day, whether something is a poison or it's a food or it's a medicine, all comes down to the dose. And you see that, even with the monarch butterflies, when they use the right amount of these toxins, it helps them because it affects the parasites more than it affects them. But we also have some species of milkweed that are really good at taking care of all the parasites, but it kills the monarchs at the same time. And so I think that's really telling us that what they use in nature has all these side effects. But it's the same for us. A lot of drugs we don't want to use when we're not sick, right? Because of all those side effects.
That's true. There's a lot of drugs that have a high side effect profile. But you say, well, you have to use it because that's all we have and that kind of thing.
And you use it at the right dose for the right amount of time.
Yeah.
Yeah, but don't overuse it.
But with the plants, and I'm going to ask you more about this, not in Western or conventional medicine. Like when we think of medicine, right, we think of drugs that come in a bottle. You get a prescription from your doctor. But in some other areas of approaches to healing, and you talk a lot about traditional healers in your book, and which I thought was fascinating, just the knowledge that they have. And but it comes from plants, like it comes from the earth, and they sort of just know by trial and error. And I think Western medicine will be like, that's dangerous. Don't do that, right? Or that could be toxic. I was curious, what is your take on that?
Well, I think first of all, most of the human population in the world is dependent on traditional medicine. It's actually very it's a relatively small proportion of the world population depends on what we call Western medicine, right? Where we're really using these drugs developed by the pharmaceutical industry that have been tested very carefully in all sorts of trials, not just for efficacy, but also for side effects. But I think that a lot of the drugs that we use based on this pharmaceutical industry also come from those plants, right? And a lot of, and not just plants, fungi as well, animals as well, actually. But a lot of that knowledge was actually first collected by traditional healers. And so we look at a lot of drugs that, we look at the chemicals, where did they come from? More than 40% of the drugs even developed these days are still dependent on plants because they have such a vast amount and diversity of chemicals that we can use. So I think what Western medicine really has done is gone a step beyond that traditional medicine, but still building on it because we know where to start looking and then purify these chemicals and sometimes change the formula so they have less side effects. So, yeah, but you're right. I think that, the pharmaceutical industry, the Western medicine we use is very well tested. And certainly there are a lot of traditional medicines that could do with some more testing to make sure it's safe and we use the right dose. But at the same time, we also know that a lot of them have been used for thousands of years in a safe way and also in ways that work.
And it's also just so fascinating to know that these treatments and options are just growing from the earth. Like they're there for you,
That's right. Yeah. And they're there because these plants or, fungi or animals, they've evolved them to really protect themselves, right? So not these plants evolved these chemicals because they're good for us. They evolved them to prevent from being eaten by herbivores or to prevent infections with fungi or bacteria or viruses. And it just so happens that because of that biological activity, we can use them as well.
Yeah. So it seems, I know it's evolution, but it also just seems kind of magical too. Like, well, like the cure could be in this plant somewhere.
Well, you think about it, evolution has had 3.8 billion years to come up with all these different things. And, it's not magical, but magical. I think it's just truly fascinating. I'm just like you. I'm just utterly stunned by what nature has been able to do. And we still know so little about it. Yeah, it's just fascinating.
And it's also sort of like this approach sometimes that I come across in conventional circles, like, oh, well, don't look there for anything, or, that's dangerous, and I understand nature can be dangerous. Like there's a lot of dangerous things there, but I still don't necessarily like the squelching of like that curiosity, hey, well, maybe there is something there, and I think your book really made me think about that too. Just how animals do it almost naturally. And it's like, okay, what's wrong with us exploring a little?
Yeah, exactly. But again, I think, I sometimes get the question, because I talk a lot about these plants that animals use and, even my own dogs eating grass. And some get the question, so having written this book, are you now just letting go of Western medicine and eating grass instead? And my answer is absolutely not. No, because
Right.
I still go to the doctor and get the pharmaceuticals from the pharmacy because they've gone through all this testing and trialing, which I think is really important. But at the same time, we can still learn a lot from both traditional medicine, and I make the case in the book, from animals also. You see them use them. That doesn't mean we should just copy what they're doing, but we can say, okay, I see them eating this really interesting plant, and they're using the inner part of the plant that seems really bitter. So let's figure out what chemicals are in there, and can we use them in a safe and efficient and efficacious way.
Yeah, I did. When I did, after I read your book, I explored what Barnaby, my dog, was eating in the park, and I picked up the leaf and I smelled. I was like, oh, it smells kind of minty.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I didn't eat it
Yeah.
though because it's New
No,
York
no,
City, so you
exactly.
never know.
No, we don't have to do that, but we can still learn from them.
Yeah, but I do use herbal treatments in my own approach. Like I don't advocate that on the podcast or anything. I always go to your doctor, but I definitely think there's stuff out there that can
Yeah,
help us that doesn't necessarily have the marketing machine.
right.
Yeah,
And it's a lot of stuff that has been used for a long time by a lot of people. So I
yeah.
woke up really, really sore throat this morning. And so
Oh,
I had my mint tea with honey, and I know that's full of very good chemicals that
yeah,
against that. So if it
yeah,
gets really bad, I may go to the doctor, but it's not that bad yet.
yeah. Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't know that.
That's all right.
Thanks for doing the podcast. So, from your book, do you have favorite examples of animals medicating themselves, like things that stood out to you or something that blew your mind when you first learned about it?
Quite a few, actually. There are so many things that really blew my mind learning about these animals, but also learning about the researchers that found these things out. But I'd say one of my favorites is the birds in Mexico City. So we're talking about finches and sparrows that use cigarette butts. And this is just completely intriguing because clearly it's not good to use cigarettes. So again, coming back to what we're talking about earlier is that things are toxic. Why would you use them? But it all comes down to, using them in the right dose and using the right balance. But so since the 1980s, people had seen that a lot of birds put really strong smelling aromatic plants in their nests. And they couldn't really figure out why that was. And the leading hypothesis was that they added to their nests because it repels blood-sucking parasites such as mites and lice and things like that. And it was really the study of cigarettes in Mexico City that showed us that is why they're doing it. And I love the story also because it started with an undergraduate student. And, it's always so great to see really young people coming up with these fantastic ideas. And so her name is Monses Suarez Rodriguez. And she was really interested in finding out what the effects are of urbanization and all the trash that people put out in cities, what effects that has on the survival of chicks in nests in those cities. And as she was looking at these nests, she found all this white, fluffy material, and she couldn't really figure out what it was until it rained, and then she could smell smoke. And that's when she realized, oh, these are the filters of the cigarette butts that people discard. The birds take them to the nest and pull all those little fibers out and put it in their nest. And she actually is funny too, because her advisor didn't believe her. And then she had to make the nest wet so he could smell it and he could discover for himself that it was the cigarette butts. And then what she also found is that when there were more butts in a nest, there were fewer parasites. Of course, that can still be coincidental. So then she did this really fascinating experiment that took her 2 years to figure out how to do it. How can you manipulate a nest so the birds don't reject it? But you can now, what she did is add live ticks, dead ticks, or no ticks. So ticks, the bloodsuckers that we get when we go on a hike, and to see what the birds would do in response. And she found that when the birds had live ticks in their nest, they started collecting more cigarette butts. And that then reduced the numbers of parasites in the nest and it increased the survival of the chicks. So really beautiful, again, this experiment to show, is it intentional? Do the birds actually collect this for that reason? Does it help them? And again, like we said earlier, that's really important as well. And then at the same time, she also found that it helped the chicks, but there were also some malformations of their blood cells. So again, showing that, yeah, it helps against parasites, but there are these side effects. But I think it's a really fascinating example.
Yeah, I love reading about that. And I guess like the parasites would probably have more of a sense of urgency to address than perhaps what's happening, in their blood, the negative side effects and the cell
Yeah.
abnormalities.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you write a lot about bears. I think you said
Yeah.
bears might have discovered aspirin.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I love that.
yeah, I think it's really fascinating example too. One of the things that really surprised me is that when you look at the science of animals using medicine, that really goes back to the 1980s. That was really the first time that people really demonstrated that animals did this, and it started with chimpanzees. But then when you look into this topic, you find that that is just the scientists. Traditional healers have known for thousands, maybe millions of years that animals use medicine. And so the bear story is a really good one because what you see, for example, when you look at Native Americans, their medicine men, their traditional healers, their shamans, they often copy bear behavior, sometimes to become bears in their rituals. And that's because they view bears as really the master of medicine. They can learn a lot from medicine. You look at every tribe, there's at least one medicine that's named after drugs. And so they looked at bears, and it wasn't just in North America. This was in Siberia and Europe. People have looked at bears for a long time. And what bears do when they come out of hibernation, after they have been lying still for months on end, they're really inflamed, they're sore, they're stiff. And one of the first things they do is they go to willow trees, take the bark and eat the bark. And that bark is full of salicylic acid, which is the chemical that actually is the basis of aspirin. And so people started using that bark. And then in the 1700s, this was rediscovered by someone in England. And then the pharmaceutical company Bayer actually made it into this drug we now call aspirin. So it's a great example, not just to show animals can use medicine, but we have learned from it. And even for one of the best examples of, the successes of our pharmaceutical industry, it seems that knowledge originated with an animal.
Should we start calling them doctors? We're kind of stealing. We're stealing. We're stealing their work without.
Yeah.
It's funny because you said Bayer, yeah, but it's sort of like a play on words.
It's a different bear.
It's a different bear. Is there a substance? Is there something that's was so strange or weird to you that stood out, and you're like, oh my goodness, I can't believe they're using that to medicate themselves?
Well, I think a really cool example is when you look at capuchins and lemurs, they will often use millipedes. And so what they do, so millipedes often produce these really toxic fluids that they have and produce to fend off predators. So when they get harassed, they start oozing these liquids, really toxic. And what these lemurs and capuchins do, they really harass these millipedes. They pull them apart, they bite them, and they get all that toxic liquid and smear it in their own fur and also in each other's fur. And that keeps all sorts of botflies and mosquitoes away. So it again acts like this repellent. I mean, it's not 100% clear yet whether that is the sole reason why they do it, because it also seems they really like it and they go frantic and they do it to each other. So it's probably also having this social function. But certainly it's intriguing that they use, that harass another animal, get their poisons and put it in their fur, and that keeps mosquitoes and flies away. So pretty cool.
I love that. And your focus is parasites and pathogens. Yeah. And I was just curious though, is there anything out there for mental health or, do animals medicate in that regard?
Yeah, so I focused very much on infections caused by parasites and pathogens, partly because that's what I know most about, but also partly that's where most of the science is at the moment. So when you look at all the best described examples based on observations and experiments, it really all comes down to infectious diseases. But it's a growing field. So we see other cases of animals using medication for different purposes. And the idea of animals using plants or other substances for mental health is really growing. And there are a lot of case reports of animals using particular plants, cats using valerian, for example, to calm them down, horses using particular herbs or even aromatic oils to calm them down. So I think right now we have very few direct scientific studies on that. So a lot of observations that suggest that animals do this, but I didn't want to put it all in the book yet because I wanted to see, the real, the scientific proof for all of these. And that's why I focus on the parasites. But yes, I think there's a lot of cases where animals do this. I see it even with my own dogs, and I have a big pollinator garden, and some of the plants really seem to relax them, and they like going there. And so I think there will be a lot of that in the years to come.
Very cool. I also liked the example in the book about the ants and the rosin, and because I actually had someone on my podcast before who talked about the rosin from the trees, and they use it for all sorts of medicinal purposes.
Yeah.
I think it's called Greco gum, and they made a company out of it. And so I was reading, I was like, oh my goodness, that's the same tree that the ants are using the rosin from the same tree that is in my chewing gum that I'm now using.
Yes. And then the question is, how did people figure this out, right? Maybe they looked at ants, but here's the really interesting thing. So ants use resin from trees, and honeybees do the same. So honeybees also collect resin, and then they mix it with the wax that they make themselves and make it into a substance called propolis. And people have used propolis for thousands of years. There are countries in South America where any corner of the street, you can buy propolis as this general health supplement, or, something you use for infection, like my sore throat right now. And it's intriguing that people knew about that, but then scientists looked at bees making this propolis and said, it's just some kind of cement. They never said, oh, it's probably also medicine. The bees are using this as medicine as well. And so that's really just in the last 10 or 20 years that scientists have shown that bees use propolis as medicine and that ants use the resin as medicine, and it keeps all sorts of infections away, whether it's bacteria, viruses, fungi, even mites, like the Varroa destructor mites that are so detrimental to honeybees. So I think it's really intriguing that, yes, we know it's medicinal, but somehow we couldn't, let animals be wise enough so that they were using it for the same reason. And I think it's this Western human arrogance that, animals aren't smart enough. We're smart, but surely they must be using it just as cement rather than medicine. Really intriguing.
Along those lines of, it's this sort of like this human arrogance, do you think recognizing that animals use medications or self-medicate will change how humans view them and how we treat them?
I mean, that was one of the goals of the book, was really to show people that, there is so much knowledge and wisdom out there. And I also think it's a very Western concept to, for us to be unique and different from the other animals in the world. And you see it time again, right? Every time we come up with something that we think makes us unique, we debunk it when we find it in other animals. So whether it's the use of tools, whether it's language, whether it's culture, whether it's empathy, in this case, whether it's medicine, every time we define something as truly human uniqueness, we debunk it because other animals have it too. So I think that that's important. And that was also interesting to see where the first evidence for animal medication really came from was the chimpanzees that I mentioned. And this was discovered by a team that consisted of a primatologist who had trained in Japan, where they don't have that need to be so different. They have much more of an influence of Shintoism and Buddhism, where humans are really viewed as part of the natural world, and we're all very similar to each other. And he worked with a traditional healer in Tanzania who knew that animals can teach us things, right? So it required people to really view animals in a different way and not think of humans as being superior to really discover this first. So yeah, I think the more we can show that animals do things that we used to think are unique to humans, the more respect it really creates. And they're just so wise, so wise in their own ways. And, I love, Frans de Waal was a colleague of mine here at Emory University. Unfortunately, he passed away last year, but he has got this whole book, Are We Smart Enough to Know How Smart Animals Are? And the answer is no, because we're all so different, right? So, but that human arrogance, yeah, I really hope we can take care of that because there's so much animals know that we don't know.
Yeah, why do you think human arrogance evolved to such a level? It's
Oh,
so annoying. Is there a book on that?
I don't
Sure
know.
there is.
I should look into it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, because I agree. Like, and even when we destroy habitats and stuff like that, and or we put ourselves at risk for a zoonotic infection, right? That might jump from one species to us because we destroyed somebody else's habitat and they had to move closer to us, even though they didn't want to.
Yeah.
And you're just like, we don't get like it's hard to get that across to people that we're like connected.
We're all connected. Yeah. And
Yeah.
sometimes, when you think about flu, every time we get flu, that always comes from birds, right? And so,
Yeah.
and then we have other viruses that come from bats and other animals. So yeah, there is a continuum. The viruses don't care that we're human or bats, right? So why do we care? I don't know.
The viruses are like, oh, this is new. It's just some new territory to conquer. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, viruses do not care. So are folks actively like developing drugs and therapies based off of what animals use? Are there scientists out in the field observing, taking notes, and
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. So first of all, a lot of medicines are based on traditional knowledge, and a lot of that comes from animals. So there's that indirect link that we have been doing for hundreds of years already. But yes, there are. So I spoke to a researcher in Congo who is specifically studying chimpanzees, bonobos, and gorillas to see what they're eating and if they're doing anything unusual. And that's often how we find medicine because, again, animals are not just eating the medicine all the time. They use it when they need it. And because, again, they're avoiding it when they don't need it because often it's very toxic. So he observed these things. And then he takes those plants to the lab, he extracts chemicals, and he tests them against bacteria and against malaria parasites in a very systematic way to see, can we directly learn from these animals and start developing this into drugs. And sometimes it's more accidental. So another example I describe is about how cats love catnip and silvervine. Silvervine is like catnip, but even stronger. It occurs in Asia. And only the last 10 years have Japanese researchers found that when cats go crazy over this catnip, they do it and it coats them in this chemical that is really strongly anti-repellent to mosquitoes. And they have patented that chemical now to see if we can develop it for human use as well. So that's more like an accidental one, but there are people that are specifically now starting to look at animals as a source of medicine for humans.
that's interesting. So the substance in catnip repels mosquitoes.
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, that's a huge problem.
Mosquitoes are a big problem. I live in Atlanta and
Yeah.
I'm looking at my backyard right now. Thankfully, it's a little bit cooler now, but yeah, mosquitoes are everywhere. And of course, mosquitoes are in so many places and they spread so many diseases. And that's true for cats because, for example, the heartworm that a lot of people are familiar with, that gets transmitted by mosquitoes. And it's really, really bad for them. And of course, for humans, malaria, yellow fever, dengue, Zika, all sorts of things. And so finding ways that can stop us from being bitten is really important.
Yeah. Wow, that is cool. Catnip. Who knew?
The cats did.
The cats knew. The cats knew. Yeah.
Yeah, they've been, because the cool thing is those researchers show that it's not just domestic cats that go crazy. And they did their experiments with silvervine. They went to zoos and now they're actually looking at all the cat species around the world and find that, the last recent common ancestor of all the cats lived 10 million years ago. And we find all these cats do it, suggesting this behavior has been around like 10 million years, maybe well before humans even were thinking about splitting off from the other apes.
Wow. Wow. So, and you talked before about how it's in the genes. But then I think you also said that some can be learned behavior or passed down, like, okay, like, hey, if my stomach is feeling sick, I know to take something. There are examples like that, you'd say.
Absolutely, a lot of them. And some of the best examples come from sheep and goats. So a lot of research, a lot of it from Utah State University, looking at livestock in general. And when when they did experiments with sheep or goats and say they're infected with intestinal worms, and you give them a particular food that's really rich in tannins. So tannins are the chemicals that make red wine taste like red wine, that they make your mouth go kind of funny. They don't like those tannins, but when they are sick and eat it and they recover from the symptoms of these worm infections, the next time they're sick, they're going to find those plants and eat them. They specifically choose them. And so that is based on their individual associations, right? So they don't feel good, they eat something, they feel better the next day, and now they've made that association and they can use that next time. So that's probably very common in a lot of different animals, and even animals that we have domesticated for thousands of years, they can still do that. And then on top of that, animals can also learn from each other. And that's really intriguing. So probably those birds that we mentioned earlier using the cigarette butts, all those birds nest really close to each other on buildings. And so it's likely that one bird started using the cigarette butts and other birds started copying it. And we see it in chimpanzees as well, where the chimpanzees, one of the ways they medicate themselves is by swallowing whole leaves, very rough leaves. And, researchers discovered they do this because the leaves are so rough, it basically scrapes parasites out of their guts and it irritates their guts. So they have diarrhea and get rid of those worms much more quickly. But it's really difficult to swallow a whole leaf. So what the chimpanzees do is they fold it over so it's smaller and then they swallow it. And there's many different ways you can fold a leaf, and different groups of chimpanzees use different ways. And experiments in a zoo have even shown that one chimpanzee develops this method, everyone else copies it. And so now I love that because it's shown they're not just using medicine. There's also cultural differences in how they use the medicine, right? So we have medicine and culture, two things we used to think were uniquely human. It's like, no, they're not. But yes, so social learning is also really important.
So a take-home message from this podcast is humans were not that special.
Yeah, I often tell my students this. I think, what makes us special is probably our obsession to try to find ways that make us special. I'm not sure that slugs or goats are obsessed with this all day to find out why they're so different from everyone else.
That's interesting. I always thought it was more like, the fear of dying or...
Oh, no, animals have that too. There's some really amazing books recently too about how animals experience death and how they also bury each other. I just learned this last weekend it was a book about mice, and mice bury each other too. So there is actually... Mice
bury each other?
Yeah, so when you let them, they will actually try to cover up the body of their deceased relatives. Yeah, it's interesting.
That is interesting.
Again, I think there's a lot more about how animals experience death and how they experience fear, how they feel pain, how they feel sadness, anxiety. Again, the more we study it, the more we learn.
I think it's such a fascinating area of research. All right, how about this? The search for a higher power, or how C.S. Lewis wrote about that. Like inside humans, there's this, there must be a god or something, a higher force. Do you see that? And I mean, we're animals too. I know that. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know if there's any evidence that other animals have a similar view of the world. If there's any, ideas about that. So I'm not aware of that. But one thing that I find interesting though is when you think about that higher power is often singling us out as the special one, right? So I don't know. That's still kind of emphasizing that we are different, right? So because we were
fair. That's a great point
of creation.
Yes.
So yeah, I don't know, but yeah, it's a great question. I don't know if we have the tools right now to understand if animals have any sense like that. Yeah, we'll have to wait and see.
Maybe. So are you still doing research in this area?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're working on now?
Yeah, so one of the things we try to find out a lot of different things. So one of the things we try to find out is how these chemicals in the milkweeds that monarchs use are really working as medicine. So is it killing the parasites, or is it doing other things such as changing the gut flora of the caterpillars? So we have increasing evidence across a lot of different animals, including humans, that our gut flora is really important for health. And so we don't know very much about it in butterflies in general, but certainly not in monarch butterflies. So it's one of the things we're doing. One of the things I really want to figure out is how do monarchs make these choices? I said earlier that I think they probably do it based on taste and they respond differently to the different tastes of the plants. That's something we haven't been able to test yet, but we want to do that. And then another thing that I'm doing in collaboration with researchers in the Netherlands is to look at honeybees and try to figure out if honeybees can use fungi. So we know honeybees use the resin and the propolis, like I mentioned earlier, but we also know that honeybees sometimes collect fungi, and we know a lot of fungi are medicinal. So we're trying to figure out if they're using fungi as medicine as well.
That's very cool. Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned the microbiome because that is like an exploding area.
Yeah.
I just talked to a researcher in Sweden, I think, who they're working on what types of bacteria, gut bacteria, would be good for removing microplastics.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yes.
Really,
And I'm like, oh my goodness, because the exposure is everywhere, right? Like
yeah.
you can't, it's like, oh my God, like no matter what you do.
I know. There's a lot of news out there, and for some of it, I just have to but I can't read it all. And it's pretty scary.
It's scary. And like how it's all in our organs, like our brain clots,
I know.
and it's everywhere. And you can do what you can to minimize exposure, but you cannot really get rid of it. So I thought it was fascinating when I was reading about like how they're working on these different bacteria that might be able to help, I guess, prevent some of the effects of the microplastic exposure in some ways. That's cool. Yeah. And bacteria in general, like the stuff that they do and the microbiome in the gut, I'm always like, wow, that's cool. How do they do that? That's neat. It's like this whole city in our guts.
It's a whole ecosystem. And it can be disrupted and then we get sick, and it can be restored. And that's why we use some probiotics, which is really intriguing. And that's actually another thing that people are looking at, for example, in honeybees, is to use probiotics and provide them with particular bacteria so that their gut flora gets better at fighting other pathogens coming in. So that's another way we can try to save the honeybees.
That's really cool. What is your take on, this is such a random question, but I've read a little bit about bees and EMF exposure and like migration patterns. And is that like a thing people are worried about?
Some people are worried about it. I haven't paid enough attention to the science right now to know how strong the evidence is. So I would need to look into that to learn more.
Yeah. I mean, I've read a little bit about it. I'm so not like dabbled, I mean, in terms of birds and bees and like the EMF. And I'm like, okay, so they have some biological impact. So are you working on any new books?
Yes. Yeah. I'm working on a book on co-evolution, and basically talking about arms races in nature. So Nature's Arms Race is kind of the working title. And that book is really trying to understand how we can explain a lot of things we take for granted, but that actually don't make any sense at all. So you think about evolution and natural selection. Some things make a lot of sense. An animal is camouflaged and a predator cannot find it, right? Key example. But then there are other things that just don't make sense. And so one of the things is you can look at plants and they have these, tons of these chemicals, really, really toxic. One of the examples I'm talking about is mustard. Why do we have mustard? Makes no sense. Why would plants produce so many of these chemicals that we like, but actually kills a lot of other things? And that's where it comes from, because they have had this arms race between cabbage-white butterflies and the mustard family that just have escalated to really high levels of these chemicals. So without that, we wouldn't have wasabi, for example. But then it talks about some salamanders that are so toxic, they can kill 25,000 mice. And it makes no sense until you understand that what eats them in the wild are snakes that are super, super resistant to these toxins. And I'll even talk about why human brains are as big as they are. And this probably comes from the arms races between males and females in sexual selection. And because in humans, we choose mates a lot based on levels of intelligence. And
We
so
do?
over time, our heads got bigger and bigger. Well, maybe it doesn't seem that way. Maybe it doesn't seem that way. But we certainly choose our partners based on things that are enabled by big brain.
Yeah.
So whether it's music or art or language or you know having a
Yeah.
good conversation, you wouldn't be able to do that without that brain.
Oh, that is very cool.
Yeah.
So, and when is the book expected to come out?
Well, the book is due a year from now, and then it will be another year or so before it's out.
Okay. Oh, wow. That sounds interesting. I will
Take
definitely,
some time.
yeah, follow up. This was great. My final question for you, what do you hope is kind of like the take home message for your book for people who, aren't like you in the sciences and the biology or just maybe are curious because it's such a compelling title and subject like what animals practicing medicine, huh?
Yeah, so I have a few different things I want to achieve with the book. So one of them is just showing how amazing nature is, right? And we've been talking about it. It's just so amazing how animals have all these ways that they use medicine, something we used to think was just us, right? And so it really opens up our eyes about nature. I hope that also allows people to see more value in nature. So I'm a biologist. I don't need that because I think we should preserve and protect nature regardless. But maybe understanding that there is so much to be learned, and you could even take the cynical view that if you don't care about nature, at least know there are pharmacists out there that could make you very rich because they can point you at some chemicals you could develop into a drug. So it just gives another reason, I think, to protect nature. The other thing I really wanted to show with the book also is that science really can be done by anyone. We sometimes have this view that science is really remote and it's for specific people. But that's why I really highlighted the research of so many people, whether it was in Mexico or Japan or Africa or Switzerland or the United States. And oftentimes when I talk about people, it's young people from all sorts of backgrounds, because I want people to realize that as long as you're excited and curious, science can be for you. And so that was another thing that I really hoped to instill in people with this book.
I love that. Yeah, and that can do like, yeah, you can do it. You don't have to be special to do science if you have the right mindset. And going back to your point about getting people interested in nature again, I think our disconnect from nature is just a growing public health problem. And,
It is.
yeah.
And yeah, and so that's also I end the book with a very simple little thing we can do to help nature, but also ourselves and our pets, and that is to build pollinator gardens. And I'm involved with the Rosalind Carter Butterfly Trail. For that reason, is to recreate native habitats that help pollinators. But when you do that, just replacing a little bit of your lawn in your yard that really doesn't support much at all, replace that and with all these beautiful native plants, and you'll be exposed to the plants, you'll see the insects, you see other species. So even in your own garden or even on your own balcony, you can reconnect with nature. And I think that will really help for our own personal health, but also the health
Yeah,
of nature as well.
absolutely. I love that. You get there's a certain rhythm when you're in nature, even gardening and stuff like that, that you just can't get when you're on your cell phone.
Well,
So,
yeah, I mean, when you talk about recreation in nature, the word is apt. Recreation. It really recreates you. It heals you. It's good for your body and for your spirit. A lot of people that have nervous tics, for example, they go for a hike or spend some time in nature, it disappears. So, and I guess a lot of the nature we can bring directly to us. Sometimes you don't have to go far.
yeah, exactly. I love that. Well, thank you so much. This was great. And I'm going to share your website, and then I'll share the link to your book too. Are there any other links I should share?
No, I think if you
Those are
share
good.
my website, all my social media are listed on there as well.
Your
So
social
people
media.
will be
Yeah.
able to find me.
I am so enjoying listening to your book. Like this was kind of like my adventure in audiobooks actually, but it's great. And I'm telling my listeners are really excited for this one. So hopefully
Great.
they'll read the book too. I encourage it.
Well, thanks so much for having me. It was great talking to you.
You too. Enjoy the rest of your day there. Hopefully it's not too hot in Atlanta.
No, it's getting a little bit cooler. It's good.
Cool. Yeah. Today's the first day in New York City where the temperature finally started
Mm,
hinting at fall. And I was like, finally, like
yeah.
I'm And goodbye to your pets, your lovely dogs there too.
Thank you. Oops.
So cute. Really cute. Wow.
Yeah, they want to go outside now.
Yeah.
Maybe eat some grass.
All right. Take
All
care.
right. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye. Thank you to everyone for listening to this episode. I hope you subscribe to the podcast, leave a review, a rating, share it, and definitely subscribe to my weekly newsletter where there's a lot of fun wellness goodies. All right. And now it's time for a closing quote. And this one is from Jane Goodall, who passed away not too long ago. And here it is. For those who have experienced the joy of being alone with nature, there is really little need for me to say much more. For those who have not, no words of mine can ever describe the powerful, almost mystical knowledge of beauty and eternity that come suddenly and all unexpected. All right. Hope to see you here next time. Tune in. Until then, have a great day and goodbye for now.